Welcome to my vlog. For today's video, we will be talking about the cellular respiration and fermentation. On a sunny day, you might decide to go for a run outside. You fill up for your run by eating a healthy breakfast, maybe a piece of fruit. But how does your body take this fruit and turn it into energy? Today, we will learn about two processes that the cells in our body use to make energy. The first is cellular respiration, and the second is fermentation. By the end of this video, you will be able to tell these processes apart and even predict which processes occur based on a given organism environment. Our body produces energy during a process called cellular respiration. Cellular respiration all starts with glucose, a sugar. Breaking down the glucose through the various steps of cellular respiration yields adenosine triphosphate or ATP, which is used as a source of energy for various cellular functions. ATP contains 3 phosphate groups, and energy is released when one of the phosphate group is taken off this molecule, leaving adenosine diphosphate or ADP. Cellular respiration turns ADP into ATP by adding back the 3rd phosphate group. This stores energy in the bands of the molecule so that the cell can later use this energy to perform its functions. Cellular respiration has 3 steps: glycolysis, the citric acid cycle, and the electron transport chain. The first step in the cellular respiration is glycolysis. This step takes place in the cytoplasm of the cell. During this process, the cell takes a molecule of glucose and breaks it down, producing 2 molecules of pyruvate. The cell needs to use 2 molecules of ATP to break down the glucose. However, the process of glycolysis also produces 4 ATP. So these steps of cellular respiration results in a net gain of 2 ATP. The next step of the cellular respiration is the citric acid cycle. This step takes place in the mitochondria. The mitochondria are organelles known as the powerhouse of the cell because they transform the pyruvate into ATP, a usable form of energy. If the cell does not have mitochondria like in single-cell organisms such as bacteria, this next step occurs in the cytoplasm. The 2 pyruvates are processed, producing 2 more ATP as well as carbon dioxide. This is the carbon dioxide that we breathe out when we exhale. While the pyruvates are being processed, the citric acid cycle takes electrons from the pyruvates and adds them to carry molecules that carry the electrons to the next steps in respiration. The cell has now in total created 4 ATP, carbon dioxide, and electron-carrying molecules. What else can a cell do? What comes next? The next and final step of cellular respiration is the electron transfer chain. These steps occurs across the membrane, either the mitochondrial for organism with mitochondria or the cellular membrane for single-celled organism. The electron-carrying molecules created in the citric acid cycle release their electrons into the membrane. As the electrons move along the membrane, they release some of their energy to transport proteins in the membrane. The energy released by the electrons power these transport proteins, allowing them to pump hydrogen ions to the other side of the membrane. The electron is passed along to several proteins. As a result, there is a high concentration of hydrogen ions on one side of the membrane. The cells in our body want the concentration of substances such as hydrogen ions to be at equilibrium in order to re-establish equilibrium. The hydrogen ions want to move back at the opposite side of the membrane. They move through a protein called ATP synthase. The movement of hydrogen ions through these proteins gives ATP synthase the power to convert ADP into ATP by adding on the third phosphate group. This step can produce up to 34 ATP for your body to use as energy. Now we've gone over the whole process, so let's proceed to the different kinds of the cellular respiration. What are they? Respiration is just breathing, right? Wrong. Respiration is the chemical process that supplies the body with energy for all the life processes. Growth and repair of cells, muscles constructions, protein synthesis, sending nervous impulses, absorbing muscles, and active transport, to name just a few. It happens in all living cells, not just plant and animal cells, but also blood cells. There are two types of respiration: aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Aerobic means with air and so need oxygen, whereas anaerobic respiration doesn't need oxygen. Let's start by looking at aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration releases energy in cells by breaking down food substances, whilst in the presence of oxygen. It is represented by the simplified equation. But don't forget the energy which is released. Glucose is broken down by oxygen to release the byproducts of carbon dioxide and water. Energy released, which is then used to make a special energy called ATP. ATP is how energy is stored for later use by the body. Aerobic respiration happens in all the time, in all cells, usually in the mitochondria. Animals get the oxygen needed from the air through their ventilation system. Plants get their oxygen from the air through the stomata. Do you remember how photosynthesis works? Compare this equation. In this, you can see that aerobic works in the opposite way to photosynthesis. Plants produced food by photosynthesis and then through respiration released energy from it. But don't be confused. Whilst plants do release oxygen as a byproduct of photosynthesis, they don't necessarily take in this oxygen for respiration. They just take in any oxygen from the air. Plants respire throughout the day and night, as do animals. But they only photosynthesize during the day when there is light available. So this is how aerobic or with air respiration works. You just need to remember that glucose is breakdown in the process of oxygen to release carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Sometimes animal and plants can get enough oxygen to respire aerobic peak, such as during intense exercise. But they still need to respire to survive. After all, everything relies on respiration for energy. Luckily, there is a backup plan: anaerobic respiration. Now, we are going to look at anaerobic respiration in both animals and plants. Starting with animals. A cheetah sprinting to catch some prey cannot take in enough air and blood around the body, forcing low for aerobic respiration. The heart and lungs can't keep up, so anaerobic respiration is carried out instead. Here is the generalized equation for anaerobic respiration. See how it differs from aerobic respiration. There is no oxygen involved in anaerobic respiration. It is much less efficient than aerobic respiration, and much less energy is released. This is because of the glucose is only partially broken down. Another problem is that lactic acid is produced. This is actually a poisonous chemical that if it is built in the body, the muscle stops working and you get a muscle cramps. You can only get rid of lactic acid by taking in oxygen again and thus replacing oxygen. Oxygen is needed to break down lactic acid, turning it into carbon dioxide and water. This is your body replacing the bulk of oxygen tank. So that is how anaerobic respiration works in animals. What about in plants? The oxygen supply can run out of plants, such as in waterlogged soil. This then forces plants to carry out anaerobic respiration, as that you need to respire constantly. Here's the generalized anaerobic respiration for plants. Notice the set of lactic acid being produced, ethanol, and carbon dioxide is made instead. This process is called fermentation, and it is used to bake bread, improve alcohol if the low is the alcohol in tea and wine. For example, in bread making, it is a carbon dioxide that is useful. The bubble in carbon dioxide help the bread rise by expanding the dough. So you should now know that when our heart and lungs cannot keep up with the oxygen demand or plants do not have access to sufficient oxygen, we have a B plan, anaerobic respiration. This is when the glucose is broken down directly. It produces much less energy than aerobic respiration, which is why it is the second choice, and in animals it produces lactic acid as byproduct, which causes muscle cramp, and so we end up with an oxygen debt, which need repaying of the exercise stop. Remember that run you were going on the beginning of this video? Well, after running for a long time, you begin to get tired and you're having a hard time breathing. You're not getting enough oxygen. So what does your body do? It cannot do cellular respiration without enough oxygen to serve as the final electron acceptor. Your body resorts to a process called fermentation. Fermentation is an aerobic process because oxygen is not required for it to occur. But fermentation is not the same as an aerobic respiration. The first step in the fermentation is glycolysis. Just like in cellular respiration, the cell breaks down a molecule of glucose to form 2 ATP and 2 pyruvate. What happens next is where fermentation and respiration differ. Instead of using the pyruvates to form more ATP or electron-carrying molecules, as the cell does during respiration, the pyruvates stay in the cytoplasm and are used to produce either lactic acid or ethanol. Fermentation can result in the production of either lactic acid or ethanol, a type of alcohol. Humans can only perform lactic acid fermentation when we have running for a long time and our body is not getting enough oxygen. Our cell must resort to using lactic acid fermentation instead of aerobic respiration to give us energy. Yeast cells, on the other hand, have do alcoholic fermentation. This is why yeast can be used to make alcohol beverages such as beer. Cellular respiration and fermentation are the processes produce the molecules we need in order to have energy for our daily activities such as running. And
that's end of our video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video so that we can learn together. Thank you for watching!